it's not just thinking about the day that your product is going to get introduced, but it's thinking about 10 years from now, 20 years from now, or even 30 years from now, what's happening to that product, what's happening to the parts of that product, what's happening to the materials that are stored in the product. I think that's maybe the biggest single change in the design profession.
Speaking of sustainability, a podcast where we talk to frontrunners, innovators, and business specialists on, well, sustainability and where they think their industries are headed, and more importantly, how they can make them more sustainable. Hi there, this is Honey Lama from Ecodesign, and in today's conversation, I'm speaking to Michiel Cornelissen, the founder of Code 21, a design studio that helps companies make their products and business strategies more sustainable. We talk about how product design has a huge impact on the environment, how you can best redesign your products, and why starting with this strategy can actually be very economically beneficial. Stay tuned. So, hi, Michiel. Thank you very much for joining me today in the conversation.
Hi, honey. Yeah, no, it's great to be invited for it.
Yeah, I'm really excited about today's topic. But before we get into that, it would be really great if you could shortly introduce yourself and what you're doing at Code 21.
My name is Michiel Cornelissen. I'm a designer, by trade, a product designer. So sustainability has always been an interest of mine, but I always also found it hard to find exactly what I, as a product designer, could do about it.
Mm-hmm.
But then about 4 or 5 years ago, I started to get a clearer picture of what I thought was important and perhaps what role design could play here. So about 4 years ago, I started setting up a company or an organization which had as a goal to find out how design can help the adoption and implementation of climate solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And then that resulted a little more than a year ago into like the actual startup of Code 21. So Code 21 is a design consultancy with the focus of implementing climate solutions in design and having design help the adoption of climate solutions.
Nice. And could you elaborate a little bit, like what were your findings? How can product design actually help the environment?
Our focus at Code 21 is a little bit on climate and climate solutions, but it doesn't exclude all kinds of other sustainability improvements, of course. A lot of the time, those go hand in hand.
Yeah.
But one of the first things that we thought about is that, yeah, there are so many climate solutions, from new ways of producing things to how we generate our energy, to transport, to agricultural changes. So the solutions are all there, but they're not being implemented
Mhm.
fast enough. And yeah, designers can help with that. So we can take an innovation and turn it into something that actually fits into people's lives. So that was kind of the starting point of this whole journey.
Yeah.
Then another thing which is important to realize, is that the products in our lives is a really big carbon footprint. It's a really important part of the sort of negative impact that we have on the environment. So as product designers, we can have a big influence by finding out how we can get by with less stuff, for instance, but also the stuff that we do create, how it's going to last longer, how we can produce it in ways that create less emissions, and also in use have less emissions.
Right.
And then sort of the third part of that story is that, and that's maybe even the most important part, and that goes a bit further than just product design. You could almost call it sort of company design or strategy design. We can use our creativity as designers to help companies implement this entire range of climate solutions.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of value in it. It's not something that you only have to do for sustainability reasons. It's something that prepares you for the future and that sort of can give you new products and new value propositions for your customers.
Yeah.
Well, that's sort of the overview of what I think are the main levers that we have as designers to do something useful within our profession.
It is interesting to think about, yeah, if there are solutions, why haven't we already implemented those? And kind of, yeah, maybe it's just the overwhelm of all the things that we need to take action in. So there's so many products and so many different spaces, and product categories and all kinds of things that we need to make steps in each of them.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think a big part of it is indeed that combination of overwhelm and confusion about what we can do, and maybe also what are things that we shouldn't have to worry about too
Yeah.
much. So making finding out where the important steps are that you
Right.
can take. And even if you don't do everything 100% right, but you get like the big 80% or 90%, you make steps
Yeah.
there, that's going to make a big difference.
Yeah.
And whereas, you don't want to get hung up on like a small change in the material that might in the end only have like a couple of percentage points influence on total lifetime emissions in a product, if there are other bigger things that might even be easier to implement.
So it's also just about getting started and starting that process to innovate and redesign sustainably.
Absolutely. What I would love to see happen in companies is that with every new development, at least one of the starting points is, let's find out how we can create this new product or this new service with the least amount of emissions when we're producing it, but also when we're distributing it, when it's being used, and finally at the end of its life.
Yeah.
Just having that realization will make a lot of difference already. I think a big part of designing today, and that's really different from when I was designing 20 or 30 years ago, is thinking ahead. It's not just thinking about the day that your product is going to get introduced, but it's thinking about 10 years from now, 20 years from now, even 30 years from now, what's happening to that product, what's happening to the parts of that product, what's happening to the materials that are stored in the product. I think that's maybe the biggest single change in the design profession,
Mm.
which I hope is happening anyway.
And I guess it's also about what you already mentioned, that it's not only for the good of society, even though that is a very important factor here, the most important, but at the same time, if your company is designing for today, you're not future proofing. You're not having a business model that is viable maybe in 10 years.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. We kind of look at this field of climate solutions. So this very broad field, which goes from manufacturing to energy production to transport, those things I mentioned before. We kind of see them as building blocks for what the world is going to look like 10 or 20 years from now.
Mhm.
And if you're a company and you're not aware of what those building blocks are, and you're not starting to become familiar with how you're sort of going to rebuild your company with those climate friendly building blocks, then you might miss out and you might not be relevant
Yeah.
anymore. And it could go faster than you think. I think if you're waiting for the laws and the regulations, you might just be too late because other companies and other people will be ahead of you.
Yeah, they've already prepared. But speaking of regulation, I actually came across some new proposals that the EU has set out. There's a few different ones regarding eco design, which is of course designing with sustainability in mind from the beginning of really starting to look at the product and what it's going to be used for and how it's going to be built. But there's a few different regulations coming up there. One was in textile, another in construction, but there's another eco design proposal that has been set out in March, I believe, which was talking about really trying to implement on a broader scale the development of sustainable products, and that there will be some requirements for how you can build products in the future, and a necessity to redesign products that are no longer fitting those requirements. And I find it really interesting that they were mentioning of course reusing, recycling and refurbishment and repairability, all these things, but that they mentioned that there would be a preference for recycled materials. How do you feel about that? I'm curious to hear from your side if you think that that is the right way to go. Is recyclability the most important factor?
I wouldn't call it the most important factor. It's sort of somewhere in the middle. It can make a big difference in some cases, but It's not where I would start, let's say.
Mhm.
Our tool, our low carbon design tool, the first step is to think about how you can extend the lifetime of products.
Hmm.
Because in almost all cases, that's going to be making a big difference. If your product can last 10 years instead of 3 years, you're basically avoiding maybe 2 new products being created and the emissions that are associated with
Right.
that. Now, definitely part of that lifetime extension is also that you're keeping in mind that whatever material you're using will be recyclable at the end of life, and maybe there's a step before it where you reduce product part basically. Starting with recycled materials now, uh, there's nothing wrong with it. It can be a good step, and just like for instance, making a choice for bio-based materials can also make a difference because at least in some cases, you're sort of storing carbon for the duration of the lifetime of the product. So, it, for most materials, I sort of see a combination of using bio-based materials and using recycled materials can make a big difference for product design.
Yeah.
But it's by far not the only thing that you can do. And I think there's also a little bit of a misconception among a lot of people that you know thinking about recycling is like the main thing that you have to do.
Mm.
But there's so much more. There's so extension of the lifetime, looking very carefully at the use phase is a really big one.
Yeah.
Because for many products, if you take like a coffee maker or a car, the emissions that are created during the lifetime of the product, during the use of the product, might actually dwarf those from production, from the materials that go into
Yeah.
production.
So it's
So
important to also do the life cycle assessment of the product and really look at where is the biggest impact of that specific product, and then also make choices accordingly.
yeah, indeed. If you have that information, that's going to basically make all the ideas and all the advice that you have so much more valuable. I tend to compare that a little bit to giving dietary advice. For instance, you can say some useful things about what's a healthy diet and what you should maybe avoid in your diet and what you should replace it with, and that's going to help people a lot of the time. But if you know what somebody's starting weight was, and if you know where the calories are that they're taking in, you can be a lot more targeted in your advice and a lot more effective as well. And if you then can measure how it's changing over time after you've implemented all those
Yeah.
changes, then you can also quantify your improvement. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and what are kind of the main steps, or how would you start approaching redesigning a product? Of course, as we just mentioned, it's pretty different for the different products, but the kind of starting off process, how would that look like?
So we in our low carbon design process or low carbon design tool, we've tried to keep it effective, but also quite simple, and so that you're being inspired to think about new possibilities and actually find out how you can make better products, not just like reducing emissions, but you're sort of creating better products in all kinds of ways. And we have 4 steps that we identified, and I've more or less talked about them already. So
Mhm.
extending the lifetime by improving quality of your product, but also by making it easier to maintain, making it easier to repair things, and in some cases, making it possible to upgrade things. That's a really big one because you can just avoid all the emissions that are associated with creating a new product.
Right.
And then the second step is, yeah, you're still creating something. So find out how you can do the creation with the least amount of emission. So that can be about reducing the amount of material that's being used. It can be about looking at the processes that are happening for creating a product and finding the alternatives. Like I mentioned before, it can be about looking at bio-based materials, looking at recycled materials that just have lower emissions right from the start. And that can maybe even some exotic materials like seaweed or bamboo might certainly play a role in your product if you look at it in that lens.
And how do you
So that
kind of go about deciding on those materials?
it really depends on the possibilities of the project. So if there is a possibility to do life cycle assessment and really find out what the difference is between the different alternatives that we're creating, that's of course the best, because then you can make a knowledgeable decision. That's not always possible, and in that case, you have to sort of use your common sense and just trust that whatever alternative you choose is probably going to be better than what you were doing before. But wherever you can quantify it, like with the eco chain tools, for instance, like Mobius, that's definitely a big advantage.
Yeah.
We still have a couple of steps to go in the process. So we were at the first two steps, and then the third step is looking at the emissions from use,
Hmm.
which can be about energy, and that usually it's either about changing something in the technology so you use less energy, or it's about changing something in the behavior of the people that are using your product.
Yeah.
And then there's a last step, which is maybe the most surprising. It's where we do like a check. We look at the entire field of climate solutions, and we try to find out if there is some connection between that range of climate solutions and the product and the functionality of that product that we have. There's always some connection. So it can be about, for instance, having a stroller that you could wonder, like, should we design it so it actually fits on a bicycle instead of in a car trunk?
Yeah.
Or in the case of a coffee maker project we did recently, you might not think about agricultural emissions when you're designing a coffee maker. But if you can find a way to link your customer with the way that the coffee is actually created, that suddenly can cut emissions maybe in half from the coffee that's being used.
Yeah.
So that last check, it's a bit fuzzy, and it's sort of very new to people, but it can make really important impact
Yeah.
in your design.
I think that makes sense because also in the end, what we're trying to do is change people's behavior and change the way that they're using products and changing the types of products that they are deciding to use. So it's not the cheapest one, it's the one that actually will last them longer. It actually might end up becoming cheaper in the long run if you have it for 10 years rather than one. Of
Okay. Yeah.
course.
Yeah. There are so many levers where we can make a change. It's definitely not only about replacing that one material with another material. It's really worth zooming out, taking a bit of a systems view, and then making it really easy for people to make the right choices. Because sometimes it's just that people might want to make the right choice, but they don't know which is the right choice.
Where there is a lot of data on people wanting to make sustainable decisions, but also having maybe not so much trust anymore in what is a great decision to make anymore. So I think it's really important that there are also these companies that are able to, in that way, communicate a little bit better about, yeah, how can consumers with their purchase intention also after buying it really make a significant difference.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you mentioned also a little bit about the different types of software that you're using. So you have a software that you've created, I believe, and you're also using, of course, the EcoChain tool, Mobius. Can you talk a little bit about how software plays a role in this design process?
Of course, we use all the software that any other designer would use. So it's like Miro for putting all the information from in our tools together and doing brainstorms. It's 3D CAD, it's visualization tools. Actually, in our processes, we don't currently use too many very specific tools, except for the connection to EcoChain, which we're very excited about, because that's going to help us quantify the decisions that we have to take, and
Yeah.
basically make better decisions. But other than that, yeah, we just do a lot of our work in Miro. It's a big list of questions. It's a big amount of sort of inspiration materials that help you move in the right direction, hopefully.
Yeah.
So software is definitely helpful, but a lot of it is also kind of common sense.
Yeah.
You could do it on paper if you wanted to, let's say.
And what do you find are the most helpful features of data? Because I really like that you guys have this approach where it's not only about making it super serious and, zooming into just the software, but it's also about the inspiration and the the ideas and combining that with the data and those information sources through software. So I'm really curious to hear what are the things that you find the most helpful from that.
Yeah, we're designers, so the visual aspect of software and just having an understandable interface is always going to make a big difference for us. We may be a little bit nerds as well, but we're not nerds who are going to spend months trying to figure out like how a piece of software works. Ideally we sort of open it up and we start using it on the fly, and the visualizations of the data, for instance, in Mobius are sort of self-explanatory. It's something where you don't have to be very, very specialized to be able to
Yeah.
use it, to be able to understand the results, but something that anybody can use.
Yeah. And you also talked about, of course, this more like strategic business focus for sustainability. And yeah, that it's important to also think of it from a kind of bigger perspective rather than just zooming into one product, for example, that you want to focus on. Can you talk a little bit about why you find that that's really important?
First of all, you can do these like a redesign of a product. You can do it as a sort of a one-off thing, and that will produce results. But of course, it's much more effective if it becomes a part of your development process, and it's something that you do every time, and it just becomes second nature. You should basically always bring that to the table if you're thinking about something new that you're doing.
Yeah.
So that's one part of it, and the other part of it's about the value that is actually available in climate solutions. I i tend to repeat myself a little bit on that subject because I'm so enthusiastic about it, because I really believe that companies, if they learn about climate solutions and they understand what they can mean for their company, for their customers, for their value propositions, they can really benefit from it. So
Mm.
it's something, where you can do something that's the right direction for the planet, find new products and new services that are going to be important for your customers, and it's going to benefit the bottom line as well and keep you relevant as a company.
Indeed, that is a pretty relevant way that it's aligned also like the business strategy and sustainable product design.
Yeah, I think it's also, you hear more and more that sustainability isn't really like a separate department anymore in a company, but it's just something that's ingrained in everything that a company does, or at least that's how it should be.
Mhm.
And I think slowly more and more companies are starting to realize this. That's just part of the ethos of the entire company, let's say.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, for a successful implementation, I'm sure you know all about that. You need to have several teams on board. There's a lot of, well, firstly, decision makers in different teams than only the sustainability team. But also, I think there's a lot of teams that the results will affect, whether that's operations or that's people in the design team or in marketing, even. They need to know what's going on and why, and be on board with the changes as well.
Exactly. It's not anymore something that you do like a couple of days a year, but it's ingrained in your way of working all the time and with basically everyone, with basically every function in your company.
It's interesting. I spoke to the sustainability manager at a company called Fritz Hansen, which is doing Danish design furniture.
Yeah,
And he was also talking about some of the worries from within the company that is the sustainability efforts going to bring the quality of the products down because we need to use now sustainable materials. And he was saying, absolutely not. We need to bring sustainability up and not the other way around. So I think that that's also an interesting aspect with, yeah, how sustainable redesign is approached as well.
I saw that interview, and I think he's spot on with that observation. And sometimes I think that we're like in a way we're incredibly lucky with the sustainability actions, the climate actions that are asked from us, because a lot of the time they're good for us in so many other ways. Like, if you're forced to create products that last really long, nothing bad about that, right? It's great for your customer. Wouldn't we all like that? And for that reason, also be better for the planet. And that's definitely a win-win.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many other of these win-wins. It's like almost all of the time, the sustainable option is also the better option for a customer and perhaps for the entire company.
Yeah, and I think if the customer is happy, they're also going to be more likely to come back to you in the next round rather than to go somewhere else and spend their money elsewhere.
That's indeed also a different way of looking at business models. So instead of, you sell your product and it's bye bye, and hopefully we'll see you again in 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there are good reasons to stay in contact with that customer, because you're helping him or her maintain the product. You're helping her repair the product. You're maybe offering upgrades that keep the product alive for long, and that customer is going to be staying with you that entire road. And that's incredibly valuable, of
Yeah.
course, for companies.
Patagonia is, of course, the OG of this initiative of lifetime repairs, I believe they have. So
Exactly. Yeah.
they seem to be doing pretty well.
Seems like it. Yeah. Yeah. They're an amazing example, of course, of doing the right thing and doing very well because of doing the right thing.
Right. I think that's a good lesson for us all to take away from this. I just have one last question. So that's something I ask everybody who comes on the podcast. So, are there any other organizations, companies, or people who inspire you in terms of what they are doing for our economy and society to make it more sustainable?
There's an incredibly long list. There are so many nice people and people that are also willing to help each other in that world. So I'll be missing a lot of people in whom I'm mentioning here. But I want to start with my co-founder, Sharon Bhagatar, who yeah, it's just really a pleasure to have this company with her. She's a great designer, but she's also a beekeeper. She's a sustainable strategist, and she's always manages to surprise me with some new way of looking at things that are that's going to make this world a little bit better. So I couldn't leave her out for sure.
None.
Then, if there's one organization that I also want to mention, it's Project Drawdown, one of the original and one of the leading research organizations on this area of climate solutions. They've been a really big inspiration for us. I think if they hadn't been around, then probably Code 21 hadn't been around. And we're actually very proud that we're now every now and then working together with them as well. So we were some really inspiring people. There are Jamie Alexander of Drawdown Labs, Jonathan Foley, Paul Hawken, who started this whole thing with the original book that came out. So if you don't know them already, definitely check them out. Project Drawdown. Lots of interesting little video clips that are very informative as well.
I like that you're giving a shout out to the people that have inspired you and have been able to give you also different ways of looking at this topic. That's also, of course, our goal with the podcast is to get different perspectives on sustainability because there's not one right way to do things. There's a lot of different perspectives that are needed and different approaches and companies. So really, really nice.
Yeah. I think you have a great job being able to talk to all these people that I'm sure are all very, very inspiring in their own way.
For sure, definitely. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed it and yeah, learned again a lot more things about sustainable product design and what all goes into it. So thanks a lot. And yeah, let's speak again soon.
Let's do that. And yeah, thanks so much as well. And let's keep on learning.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for watching this chat. If you enjoyed this episode, please click here to subscribe or here for more recent episodes. Bye bye.